Miss Howard, don't you think someone else should handle the gifted program presentation? Your section has the lowest test scores this quarter. Principal Vaughn's voice carried across the teacher's lounge, making sure everyone heard. I gripped my coffee mug tighter, feeling 20 pairs of eyes on me. Another Monday morning ambush. My name is Ellie Howard, and for the past 4 years, I've been the invisible workhorse of Ridgepoint Elementary in Bellevue, Michigan. I'm the teacher who covers everyone's recess duty, who stays late decorating the gym for events no one else wants to handle, who takes on the kids with behavioral issues because you're so good with the difficult ones, Ellie. I'm also the teacher whose ideas get stolen in staff meetings, whose achievements get overlooked during evaluations, and whose classroom got relocated to the portable building with spotty heating because you never complain, Ellie. Actually, Principal Vaughn, my students' scores reflect their starting points. Many began below grade level, and they've shown significant growth. My voice was steady but quiet, as usual. Growth doesn't impress parents like achievement does. Melanie Parker, our 5th grade team lead, adjusted her designer glasses with a smirk. We need to put our best foot forward at the meeting tomorrow. As the laughter rippled around the room, I nodded and slipped out. Just another Monday in a long line of Mondays where I swallowed my dignity along with my lukewarm coffee. Back in my classroom, the portable unit at the far end of the playground, I found a note on my desk from the janitor. Heater repair delayed again. Budget cuts. I sighed, keeping my coat on as I prepared for my students to arrive. The classroom was barely 65 degrees, but I'd gotten used to teaching in my coat during winter months. My 4th graders would arrive wearing their jackets too, having learned that Miss Howard's room was always chilly. Kelly Martinez, my most conscientious student, arrived first as always. "Morning, Miss Howard. Mom sent you this." She placed a small thermos on my desk. "She said it's that tea you liked at our Christmas party." I smiled genuinely for the first time that day. That was very thoughtful of her. "She also said to tell you she's looking forward to hearing your presentation tomorrow night." Kelly unzipped her backpack. "About the special learning programs." My smile faltered. I hadn't planned on telling the students that Principal Vaughn had just cut me from the presentation schedule. "I'll definitely see her there," I said instead. As the rest of my students filtered in, I pushed the morning's humiliation aside. In this classroom, even a cold, cramped, portable one, I was respected. Here, my work mattered. During lunch break, I ducked into the main building to use the staff restroom. The portable didn't have one, meaning I had to time bathroom breaks carefully between classes or hold it for hours. Another small indignity I'd grown accustomed to. As I washed my hands, the door swung open and Melanie entered with Justine Rodriguez, the 2nd grade teacher who'd recently been appointed to the curriculum committee. A position I'd applied for, but been passed over despite having more experience and a master's in curriculum development. They barely acknowledged me, continuing their conversation as if I were invisible. "So the gifted program presentation is all set for tomorrow," Melanie said, reapplying her lipstick. "I've updated the slides to highlight how my class's project-based approach resulted in those impressive reading scores." "Didn't you adapt that approach from Ellie's curriculum proposal last year?" Justine asked, glancing my way. Melanie waved dismissively. "Her ideas were rough sketches. I developed the actual implementation framework." That was a blatant lie. I had spent months refining that curriculum, complete with detailed lesson plans and assessment tools. I'd shared it during a professional development day, and within weeks, Melanie had presented a suspiciously similar framework to the principal as her own innovation. "Anyway," Melanie continued, "I need your help convincing Principal Vaughn to reassign some of the ESL resources. My class could use more supplementary materials for the advanced readers." "But aren't the ESL resources already allocated?" Justine frowned. "I thought Ellie's class had most of the English language learners." I froze, paper towel in hand, listening more intently. "Please, those resources are gathering dust. Her kids are still struggling with basic comprehension, while mine are ready for advanced material." Melanie lowered her voice slightly. "Between us, the district evaluates schools based on top-tier performance, not how well the struggling students perform. We need to showcase excellence, not remediation." "I guess that makes sense." Justine said, though she sounded uncertain. Trust me, I've been here 8 years. I know how the system works. Melanie checked her reflection once more. Oh, and don't forget, we need to finalize the field trip plans. I've earmarked most of the grade level funds for the museum visit for my class in May. Wasn't there supposed to be a science center trip for the whole grade? Justine asked. Budget cuts, Melanie said smoothly. We can only afford to send one class, and since mine has the parent volunteers and the highest achievement rates. They walked out, still not acknowledging me. I stood there, hands gripping the sink as pieces began falling into place. The repeated budget cuts, affecting only certain classrooms. The resources that never seemed to reach my students, despite being allocated in district plans. The field trips my class always seemed to miss out on. That afternoon, I was making copies for tomorrow's parent-teacher conference night when I overheard Melanie and our assistant principal, Craig Bennett, in the adjacent room. Did you adjust the achievement data like I asked? Melanie's voice was hushed but clear. Yes, but I'm not comfortable with this, Mel. Combining the honors classes' scores with your regular classes to boost your averages. Relax. No one's getting hurt. Besides, we need those grant numbers to look good, and Howard's class would drag everything down. What about the missing field trip money? I told you I borrowed it for the conference in Phoenix. I'll replace it before anyone notices. My heart pounded as I realized what I was hearing. For years, I'd assumed I was the problem. Too plain, too quiet, too accommodating. But the real issue was that people like Melanie had learned they could walk all over me while hiding their own incompetence and dishonesty. I abandoned my copying job and returned to my classroom, mind racing. Opening my laptop, I began searching through old emails, budget requests, and meeting minutes. I stayed until the custodian kicked me out at 7, then continued working at home until well past midnight. By the time exhaustion forced me to bed, I had compiled a disturbing pattern of resource manipulation, data misrepresentation, and outright lies that had been shaping Ridgepoint's operations for years. Not just Melanie, but Principal Vaughn and several others had been gaming the system, ensuring their favorites received the best resources while classes like mine, filled with ESL students, kids with learning disabilities, and children from lower-income households, got the scraps. That night, I barely slept. By morning, something had shifted inside me. I was done being Ridgepoint's doormat. When I arrived at school, I avoided the teacher's lounge and went straight to my classroom. Throughout the day, I taught with the same care I always did, but inside, I was strategizing. After dismissal, I drove to Office Depot and spent $87 of my own money on color-coded folders, professional quality printouts, and a new flash drive. I returned home and continued organizing the evidence I'd gathered, creating clear, undeniable documentation of everything I'd discovered. I also made a phone call to Marcus Green, a former colleague who now worked in the district superintendent's office. We'd stayed friendly over the years, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss education policy. Today, however, I needed information more than conversation. Marcus, what can you tell me about district policy on resource allocation for ESL programs? I asked after our initial greetings. That's oddly specific, he said. Everything okay at Ridgepoint? Just doing some research, I replied, trying to sound casual. I'm putting together a presentation for parent-teacher night. Well, it's pretty straightforward. Title III funds are specifically designated for English language learners and can't legally be redirected to general education resources. He paused. Why do you ask? Just making sure I understand the guidelines correctly, I said. And what about test score reporting? Is there a standard protocol? By the end of our conversation, I had confirmation of what I suspected. Much of what was happening at Ridgepoint violated not just ethical standards, but district policies, and in some cases, state regulations. Parent-teacher conference night at Ridgepoint was always a production. The cafeteria transformed into a showcase of student achievements, with teachers stationed at tables around the perimeter. Parents rotated through, collecting progress reports and viewing carefully curated displays of their children's work. I arrived early, wearing something other than my usual practical slacks and sweater. The black dress was still professional, but fitted, paired with the red heels my sister had given me last Christmas that I'd never had the courage to wear to school. Wow, Miss Howard, you clean up nice. Craig's eyes widened as I walked in. Special occasion? You could say that. I smiled, setting up my station with materials I'd spent half the night preparing. My display included the usual student work samples, but also featured detailed charts showing my students' growth throughout the year. I had calculated each child's progress based on their starting points, creating a compelling visual representation of how much they had actually learned, even if their absolute scores weren't as high as those in other classes. I also placed a stack of handouts near the edge of my table, information I had no intention of distributing unless the right moment presented itself. By 6 o'clock, the cafeteria buzzed with parents and students. I greeted my students' families warmly, genuinely proud to share their children's accomplishments. Many expressed appreciation for my detailed approach to tracking progress. Ethan struggled so much at the beginning of the year, Mrs. Lang said, examining her son's portfolio. But look at this writing sample from last week. Such improvement. He works incredibly hard, I told her honestly. All of my students do. At 6:30, Principal Vaughn took the microphone, welcoming everyone and highlighting the school's accomplishments. Right on cue, he called up Melanie to discuss the school's improved test scores and to introduce the expanded gifted program initiative, the presentation I'd been removed from. Before Miss Parker begins, I said, standing up from my table, I'd like to distribute these handouts I've prepared. They show each class's actual progress this year, broken down by starting levels and growth percentages. Principal Vaughn blinked. Miss Howard, we have a program to follow. This will only take a moment, I said, my voice clearer and louder than I'd ever used at school. Parents deserve complete information, don't they? Something in my tone made him hesitate long enough for me to start passing out my papers to the nearest parents. Murmurs spread as people began examining the charts. What is this? Melanie hissed, grabbing a copy. Her face paled when she saw I'd broken down the data to show actual classroom performance versus the combined numbers she'd been presenting. Just accurate information, I said. I thought transparency was important for tonight's discussion about the gifted program funding. Craig looked from me to Melanie, realization dawning on his face that I'd heard them yesterday. Principal Vaughn, trying to maintain control, chuckled nervously. Well, while Miss Howard's enthusiasm is commendable, let's stick to our agenda. Miss Parker will now discuss our achievement metrics. Melanie stepped forward, visibly rattled but professional enough to begin her rehearsed speech about Ridgepoint's rising test scores. I waited until she reached the part about resource allocation. Actually, I said, standing again, I have a question about resource allocation myself. I turned to face the parents. Did you know that the 4th and 5th grade field trip to the Science Center was canceled last month due to budget constraints? The parents who'd paid for that trip sat up straighter. That's not relevant to tonight's presentation, Principal Vaughn said sharply. I think it is, since it relates to how school funds are managed. I maintained eye contact with him, especially since Miss Parker attended a conference in Phoenix that same weekend, a conference not approved in our school's professional development budget. The room went silent. Melanie's face flushed crimson. That's a serious accusation, Miss Howard, Principal Vaughn said, his voice dangerously low. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. Just like it's a fact that my classroom has had broken heating all winter despite 3 maintenance requests, or that the ESL resources meant for my students were redirected to create promotional materials for the district showcase. Mrs. Liang spoke up from the back. Is this true? Ethan said it was always cold in your classroom. Unfortunately, yes, I replied. But tonight isn't about complaints. It's about honesty, which our children deserve from their educators. I walked to the center of the room, aware that I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. For 4 years, I've watched resources being misallocated, students being underserved, and data being manipulated to make certain teachers look better. I've stayed quiet because I love teaching and I love my students. But tonight, I'm speaking up because I love teaching and I love my students. I pulled out my tablet and projected a spreadsheet onto the presentation screen. These are the actual budget allocations for each classroom this year, alongside the supply requests that were denied. You'll notice some interesting patterns. Principal Vaughn tried to step in. This is completely inappropriate. What's inappropriate? Interrupted Mrs. Sanderson, our PTA president, is that my daughter's class couldn't get basic art supplies while other classrooms got new tablets. The meeting erupted into questions from parents. I stayed calm, answering with facts, not accusations. When Melanie tried to dismiss my concerns as the complaints of a disgruntled employee, I simply presented the email thread where she'd taken credit for my curriculum development work. This isn't about being disgruntled, I explained. It's about creating an environment where every student gets the support they need and where resources are distributed fairly. Mr. Jackson, whose son had behavioral issues and had been in my class for 2 years, stood up. My boy needed those reading intervention materials all last year. We were told the school couldn't afford them. Meanwhile, I said, the advanced reader program received 3 times its allocated budget. I'm not saying advanced readers don't deserve resources. They absolutely do. But not at the expense of children who are struggling. Melanie tried to regain control. These allocations were approved by administration based on demonstrated need. Based on manipulated data, I corrected, pulling up another slide. Here's the original testing data from September, and here's the version presented to the district for resource allocation. Notice anything interesting about how the scoring brackets were adjusted? Principal Vaughn's face had gone from red to ashen. He knew exactly what I was showing, how the scoring metrics had been selectively applied to ensure certain classes appeared to need more resources, while others could be overlooked. Miss Howard, he said, his voice strained, I think we need to continue this discussion privately. I've tried that approach for 4 years, I replied calmly. Private concerns are easy to dismiss, but these aren't my concerns alone. They affect every student in this school. By this point, several parents had pulled out their phones, either recording or texting others. Mrs. Sanderson was rapidly typing on her tablet, likely emailing other PTA members. I move that we call an emergency PTA meeting right now, she announced, and I'd like to request that someone contact the superintendent's office. Already done, said Mr. Patel, who served on the school board. I texted Bill Walsh 10 minutes ago. He's on his way. Principal Vaughn looked like he might faint. This is highly irregular. So is misappropriating field trip funds for personal travel, I replied, my voice still even, or redirecting Title III funds away from ESL students, which may actually violate federal guidelines. Craig, who had been standing near the back, stepped forward. I can confirm some of what Ms. Howard is saying. The data reporting hasn't been entirely accurate. Melanie whirled to face him. Craig, what are you doing? The right thing, finally, he said quietly. I'm tired of being part of this. By the time Superintendent Walsh arrived, urgently called by Mr. Patel, parents were demanding answers about everything from the field trip money to why certain classrooms consistently received preferential treatment. Miss Howard, Superintendent Walsh said after getting a quick briefing, perhaps we should continue this discussion privately. I respect that suggestion, I replied, but these issues affect everyone in this room. I've tried addressing them privately for years. I handed him a folder. This contains documentation of every incident I've mentioned tonight, plus the original datasets showing how test scores have been selectively reported. I've also included a detailed proposal for restructuring our resource allocation to better serve all students. The superintendent's eyebrows rose as he flipped through the pages. You prepared all this? I've been preparing it for 4 years. I just didn't have the courage to present it until now. The meeting eventually moved to the library, with the superintendent, the school board president, hastily called in, Principal Vaughn, Melanie, and a small committee of parent representatives. I presented my case methodically, without emotion or personal attacks, focusing solely on the impact these issues had on students. The real problem, I explained, is that we've created a system that rewards the appearance of success rather than actual student growth. When we divert resources from struggling students to bolster those already succeeding, we're not actually educating, we're just maintaining inequity. Mr. Patel nodded thoughtfully. These allocation discrepancies are troubling, particularly the ESL funding issues. And the creative bookkeeping regarding the field trip money is completely unacceptable. added Superintendent Walsh, reviewing the financial documents I'd provided. Principal Vaughn attempted damage control. There may have been some administrative oversights, but I assure you. An oversight is forgetting to order supplies, interrupted Mrs. Sanderson. This looks systematic. I concur, said Superintendent Walsh, and I'm particularly concerned about the data manipulation. That affects district-wide resource planning. By the time we finished 3 hours later, Superintendent Walsh had committed to a full audit of the school's finances and resource allocation practices. Principal Vaughn sat ashen-faced, his earlier bluster deflated by the weight of evidence I'd presented. Melanie had been asked to take administrative leave, pending investigation of the field trip funds. As we filed out of the library, parents stopped to thank me. Mrs. Leong hugged me, whispering, "Ethan always said you were the best teacher, even with the cold classroom." I drove home in a daze, equal parts terrified and exhilarated. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, I felt like I'd done right by my students. The next morning, I fully expected to be fired. Instead, I was called to a meeting with Superintendent Walsh and the district's curriculum director. "Miss Howard," Superintendent Walsh began, "last night was unprecedented." "I understand if you need my resignation," I said quietly. "Resignation? On the contrary. What we need is more educators with your attention to detail and commitment to equity." He slid a folder across the table. "We're creating a new position, District Coordinator of Instructional Resources. The role would involve overseeing resource allocation across all elementary schools and ensuring equitable distribution based on student needs." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "We need someone who understands classroom needs but can also see the bigger picture. Someone meticulous and principled. Your presentation last night, while unorthodox, demonstrated exactly those qualities." "But I publicly confronted my principal and a colleague," I said, still processing. "You publicly advocated for your students and for fairness," corrected the curriculum director. "That's what we need more of." The transition wasn't immediate. I finished the school year with my fourth graders, now in a properly heated classroom in the main building. The district audit revealed even more financial improprieties than I'd uncovered, resulting in significant structural changes at Ridgepoint. Some teachers avoided me in the hallways, viewing me as a traitor or troublemaker. Others quietly thanked me, sharing stories of times they'd also felt sidelined or seen resources unfairly distributed. Craig, surprisingly, became an ally, providing additional documentation that proved crucial to the audit. 2 months after the school year ended, I cleaned out my classroom for the last time. My students had thrown me a goodbye party, complete with hand-drawn cards expressing how much they'd miss me. Even as I prepared for my new district role, part of me mourned leaving direct classroom teaching. As I carried the last box to my car, I noticed Melanie emptying her classroom as well. The investigation had revealed not just the misappropriated field trip money, but years of data manipulation and resource hoarding. She'd been asked to resign, along with Principal Vaughn, who'd enabled the system of favoritism. She saw me watching and paused. For a moment, I thought she might speak. Instead, she turned away, continuing to pack her designer teaching supplies into expensive tote bags. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only relief that the system was being corrected. My new office at the district building wasn't fancy, but it had proper heating, a door that closed, and a nameplate that read, "Eleanor Howard, Coordinator of Instructional Resources." On my first official day, I arrived early to find several principals waiting to discuss their school's needs. No one was looking through me anymore. No one was dismissing my ideas or talking over me in meetings. My inbox contained emails from teachers I'd never met, sharing concerns they'd been afraid to voice before. That afternoon, I visited an elementary school across town, observing a class of ESL students working with new materials funded through properly allocated Title III money. Seeing their engagement, watching their teachers' relief at finally having adequate resources, I knew I'd made the right choice. That evening, I kicked off my sensible shoes, not the red heels, those were saved for special occasions, and poured myself a glass of wine. My sister called, eager to hear how the new job was going. "It's good," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Really good, actually." I'm still in shock that quiet little Ellie staged a takedown at a parent-teacher conference, she laughed. It wasn't a takedown, I corrected her. It was just finally standing in my own spotlight instead of letting others push me into the shadows. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset over Bellevue's modest skyline. For years, I'd thought power meant being loud, being feared, or being willing to step on others. But real power, I'd discovered, came from something much simpler: the quiet strength to stand firm in your truth, even when standing alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, budgets to balance, resources to allocate, and inevitably, more difficult conversations. But for the first time in my career, I wasn't dreading any of it. The spotlight no longer felt like a place of exposure and vulnerability. Instead, it had become exactly where I belonged.